Beneath the Anatolian sun, the kingdom of Lydia shimmered like a mirage of wealth and power. Its capital, Sardis, nestled between the golden hills near the Pactolus River, gleamed with palaces whose walls caught the light of 1,000 torches. This was the realm of King Croesus, a man whose very name became a synonym for unimaginable riches. Merchants crossed from Greece, Phoenicia, and Persia to trade in Sardis, their caravans heavy with silk, wine, and precious stones. The air itself seemed to hum with gold dust. Lydia was not merely a kingdom, it was the crossroads of the ancient world, where East met West and ambition met destiny. But behind the gold lay shadows. Croesus, though wise in governance and generous to his people, had begun to believe in his own legend, the man whom fortune herself adored. He ruled from marble halls lined with tributes from conquered lands, confident that the gods had chosen him for eternal prosperity. His armies were strong, his alliances vast, and his treasuries endless. Yet beneath this splendor, cracks had begun to form. The slaves who tended his halls whispered of hunger and fear. Foreign captives from distant wars resented their golden chains. And beyond Lydia's borders, in the vast plains of the east, a new power stirred, the rising Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. To many in Lydia, Persia was a rumor carried by the wind, a disciplined force that had swallowed Media and Babylon, a people hardened by desert and war. To Croesus, it was an opportunity, one more realm to conquer, one more tribute to his glory. Advisors warned caution, yet he dismissed them with laughter. He trusted the oracle of Delphi, whose cryptic words had so far guided him to triumph. When told that a great empire would fall if he crossed the river Halys, he smiled, never considering that it might be his own. Sardis lived in a fever of confidence. Priests offered sacrifices to Apollo, nobles dined on silver platters as lyres sang praises of their king. In the marketplace, gold coins stamped with Croesus's lion insignia passed from hand to hand, the first standardized currency in the known world, the mark of a kingdom that believed it had mastered both wealth and fate. Yet in the palace corridors, far from the glittering banquets, the rhythm of life was quieter, more brittle. Servants moved in silence, their eyes lowered. They heard what others did not. In the hush between footsteps, they caught fragments of royal councils, careless laughter, whispered doubts. Among them was one man, a slave whose name history would remember in scorn and fear, Eurybates. He had once been a merchant, captured in war and forced into servitude. Now he polished the king's armor, carried his messages, and lived among the murmurs of power. He had seen the king's arrogance grow, the advisors' unease deepen. He heard talk of war against the east, of prophecies twisted to fit pride, of armies being readied for a campaign none dared question. Each word lodged in his mind like a spark in dry grass. The contrast between Croesus's glittering throne and the slave's dim world could not have been sharper. While the king dreamed of empire, Eurybates dreamed of freedom. He watched the soldiers boast of easy victory, the nobles sneer at the Persians they had never seen, and he felt a strange certainty that this arrogance would be the death of them all. Still, he held his tongue, for in Sardis, even whispers could be fatal. The camera of time lingers on Croesus standing atop the battlements of Sardis, the sun setting behind him, his robes shimmering like molten gold. The wind carries the faint echo of laughter and music from the city below. To the Lydians, their king was the chosen of fortune. To the gods, perhaps, he was already marked. In the deepening dusk, the palace torches flicker, and somewhere in the servants' quarters, a man bends close to another and murmurs a single line. A line that will travel farther than any army. The kingdom of gold stands proud, unaware that within its walls, the first whisper of its ruin has already begun. In the corridors of Sardis, where polished marble met shadowed stone, whispers carried farther than shouts. Servants spoke in fragments, careful as if words themselves could draw blood. Among them, Eurybates moved unseen, a man invisible to those who ruled his world. He listened not by choice but by survival. In a palace where luxury muffled truth, his silence became his armor. He had learned to read the tremor in a noble's tone, the weary look of a general returning from council, the restless pacing of a king at night. Lydia was a land of gold, but gold had begun to weigh heavy, like a chain. One evening, as rain swept against the high windows of the council chamber, Eurybates was ordered to tend the torches. Beyond the curtains, Croesus met with his war council, his generals, priests, and seers. The air inside smelled of wine, oil, and ambition. Croesus sat upright, his eyes bright with purpose. "Cyrus marches west," he said. "Shall we wait for him to come to us?" Around him, his counselors hesitated. One warned that Persia's rise was no passing storm. Another urged him to act before Cyrus could consolidate his power. The king listened, but his mind was already made. He sought reassurance, not counsel. He spoke of the oracle of Delphi, whose message had arrived days before. If Croesus crosses the Halys, the Pythia had proclaimed, he will destroy a great empire. The words rolled off his tongue with reverence, as though the gods themselves had promised him glory. None dared to question which empire the prophecy meant. Eurybates, crouched in the shadows tending the lamps, saw the flicker of doubt in a general's eyes, a doubt swallowed quickly beneath the weight of royal certainty. When the meeting ended, Croesus dismissed his men with a smile, leaving Eurybates alone to gather the goblets and clear the table. But as he worked, his thoughts raced. He had heard enough. Lydia would march to war, and the king's pride would lead them there. He could already see the signs of overconfidence. Supply lines stretched thin, soldiers boasting of easy victory, priests promising divine favor. It was not strength he saw in Sardis anymore, but blindness gilded by gold. Outside the palace walls, the mood was shifting. Rumors of Persian victories trickled in with traders from the east. Some said Cyrus had conquered Babylon's allies. Others spoke of cities that opened their gates to him without resistance. Yet in Sardis, such talk was silenced. The people were told their king was destined to triumph. In the taverns and markets, the same phrase echoed, "Croesus cannot fall." And yet, among the slaves and servants, a different whisper spread, one that questioned how long fortune could stay loyal to a man who tested the gods. Eurybates felt the weight of this contradiction pressing upon him. He was neither hero nor villain, only a man cornered by fate. To remain loyal was to die with a master who saw him as nothing. To betray was to gamble his life on survival. Each night, he watched the palace fires burn against the dark hills and wondered if the light meant safety or warning. His resentment had grown slowly, like rust beneath gilded armor. Every insult, every command barked without thought, had built towards something inevitable. Days later, an emissary arrived from Persia, a man who had once been Croesus's ally, now carrying a message from Cyrus the Great. Croesus met him with the arrogance of a king who believed himself untouchable. When the messenger departed, he was mocked in the halls, even the guards laughed. But Eurybates, who helped prepare the guest chamber, caught a glimpse of the man's calm eyes, the look of one who had already seen victory take shape. That night, as he lay awake in the servants' quarters, Eurybates realized that Cyrus's empire was not merely advancing by sword but by silence, by understanding the cracks in men's hearts before striking them. The breaking point came quietly. Eurybates was summoned to deliver sealed messages to a frontier commander. As he rode through the hills, he thought of the faces in the palace, proud generals, fat merchants, a king too certain of his destiny. At a crossroads, he stopped. The parchment in his hand felt heavy with the weight of nations. He turned his horse eastward, toward the rising sun. The choice was made. The journey was long, the nights cold. When he finally reached the Persian border, he asked for an audience with Cyrus's officers. They listened as he spoke, of Sardis's defenses, of its gates and watchtowers, of the king's faith in walls and oracles. He offered not flattery, but truth. His voice was low, steady, almost reverent as he said, "Croesus believes the gods are with him. He does not know that men can be gods to themselves." His words were carried to Cyrus, who saw in this slave not treachery, but opportunity. Back in Sardis, no one yet knew that a whisper had crossed the Halys. Croesus prepared his armies, confident that the world itself would bend before his will. Priests sang hymns of destiny, soldiers sharpened their spears, and the king gazed east with the calm assurance of a man who believed fortune could never turn. But in the deserts beyond, another king had begun to move, one who listened where others spoke, one who built his empire not on gold, but on knowledge. The whisper that left Sardis that night was not yet an army, not yet a siege, it was only a breath, a voice carried by the wind. Yet it was enough. What Croesus had built over decades of conquest and coin would begin to unravel because one man in the shadows had decided that silence was no longer his refuge. The whisper had left the palace, and it would soon echo in the chambers of a king who never lost. Far across the Halys River, beyond the mountains that marked the edge of Lydia's reach, the rising empire of Persia stirred with quiet purpose. In the heart of a vast encampment, Cyrus the Great listened as the slave from Sardis was brought before him. The wind of the eastern plains carried the scent of smoke and iron. Soldiers moved like shadows among the tents, their discipline and silence a mirror of their king's own restraint. Cyrus was not a ruler of luxury and marble, he was a commander forged in hardship, one who had risen from rebellion to build an empire from the ashes of others. He valued truth over flattery, and when Eurybates was led into his presence, trembling and exhausted, Cyrus's first question was not about loyalty but about knowledge. The tent was dimly lit, its only light the glow of a small brazier. Cyrus studied the man before him, noting the calluses of labor on his hands, the hollow cheeks of a life lived in servitude. Eurybates bowed low and began to speak, his voice uneven at first but steadying as the words found their rhythm. He described Sardis, its towering walls, its storerooms filled with grain and gold, its garrison proud yet untested. He spoke of Croesus's arrogance, of his blind faith in prophecy, and of his certainty that the gods would hand him victory. Cyrus listened without interruption. When the slave paused, the Persian king only asked, "What does your master fear?" Eurybates hesitated. "Nothing," he said. "And that is his weakness." The tent fell silent except for the crackle of the brazier. Cyrus understood what this meant. He had seen empires fall not from invasion but from pride. The Medes, the Babylonians, all had believed themselves invincible until they mistook divine favor for eternal safety. Now Lydia, golden and overconfident, stood on the same edge. That night, Cyrus called his generals. The slaves' words were repeated before them, each detail weighed like coin. Sardis's cavalry, renowned across Anatolia, would charge first and rely on speed. Croesus's men believed no force could stand against them in open battle. Cyrus smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips. He would not meet strength with strength, but with wit. As maps were spread across the table, Cyrus's generals pointed to the plains of Fimbra, where Croesus would likely advance. The land was wide and open, perfect for cavalry, perfect for a trap. Cyrus proposed a tactic so unorthodox it drew uneasy glances. He would line his front ranks not with horsemen, but with camels, beasts of burden, reeking and unpredictable. Horses feared their scent, and Cyrus intended to use that to his advantage. Where Croesus expected a noble charge, he would find confusion and panic. The strategy was not written in any ancient manual, it was born from the mind of a man who understood that war was not only fought with swords, but with the human heart. Eurybates, permitted to remain in the camp, watched this new kind of king at work. Where Croesus had surrounded himself with flatterers and priests, Cyrus walked among his soldiers, sharing their meals, listening to their fears. He valued loyalty, but not blind obedience. The Persians followed him not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in him. For the first time, Eurybates felt something unexpected: respect. He had fled one master and found another, yet this one did not need gold to command devotion. Days passed as preparations for war took shape. Scouts rode out to map the terrain. Engineers gathered timber for siege engines. Around the campfires, Persian officers spoke of destiny, not as prophecy, but as purpose forged by will. To them, Croesus was a relic of a fading age, a king trapped in his own splendor. They saw themselves as the dawn of a new kind of empire, one built not on wealth, but on unity. Eurybates' information became their foundation: the routes into Lydia, the weaknesses in its defenses, the false confidence of its ruler. Yet even as Cyrus plotted the downfall of Sardis, he treated Eurybates with a curious mercy. "You have traded one king for another," he said one night as they walked along the camp perimeter. "Do you regret it?" The slave lowered his eyes. "Regret," he murmured. "I have traded chains for a chance to live." Cyrus looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Then you understand what most kings do not, that every empire begins with the will to survive." As dawn rose over the Persian camp, banners unfurled in the wind, their colors catching the first light. The soldiers gathered in disciplined ranks, the hum of preparations swelling into the rhythm of destiny. Cyrus mounted his horse, eyes fixed westward. Behind him, Eurybates watched the horizon, where the hills of Lydia shimmered faintly in the distance. He felt the weight of what he had set in motion, a kingdom he once served now standing at the edge of ruin. In Sardis, Croesus's priests were offering sacrifices to Apollo, convinced that fortune still favored their king. In Persia, a different kind of prayer was taking place, not to gods, but to resolve, to calculation, to the understanding that knowledge could be sharper than any blade. When Cyrus gave the order to march, the sound of 100,000 feet echoed across the plain. The whisper that had begun in the corridors of Sardis had become something unstoppable, a tide of men and purpose moving west. And as the dust rose behind the advancing army, the fate of Lydia was sealed, not by prophecy or gold, but by the quiet words of a man who had once been nothing more than a slave. The Persians closed in around Sardis, their banners rippling beneath a gray winter sky. The city's walls, once thought unbreachable, now trembled beneath the weight of the siege. Inside, Croesus tried to rally what remained of his forces. His armor shone faintly in the dim light, the gold dulled by soot and desperation. From the ramparts, he watched as Cyrus's soldiers advanced in perfect formation, disciplined, tireless, unrelenting. When the Lydians charged, they met not chaos but order, not panic but precision. Cyrus had studied Croesus's tactics and dismantled them with patience. Every move the king made, the Persian answered with quiet inevitability. The final blow came not through brute force but through ingenuity. A Persian soldier noticed that the defenders on the walls often stood atop battlements that overhung the slope. Cyrus seized upon the detail. He ordered his best troops to scale the cliffs at night where the defenses were weakest. By dawn, the Persians poured into the city from above, striking from behind. Panic spread like wildfire through Sardis. Croesus, realizing all was lost, retreated to his palace and sent messengers to Delphi, begging the gods for deliverance. But the answers that once came with gold and prophecy were now replaced with silence. The mighty halls that had once echoed with laughter were filled with the shouts of enemies and the clash of steel. Flames began to rise, licking at the tapestries woven from his fortune. By nightfall, the golden city was broken. Croesus, bound in chains, was dragged before Cyrus. His face bore the exhaustion of a man who had seen destiny fulfilled in the cruelest way. The richest man in the world had lost everything, not in one decisive battle, but in the slow, methodical unraveling of his own empire. The fires of Sardis burned through the night, painting the sky in orange and ash. Croesus stood among the ruins, his crown shattered, his kingdom gone. Before him, Cyrus the Great approached, calm and solemn. "So, it is you who has conquered me," Croesus murmured. Cyrus's reply was cold but true. "No, Croesus, you have conquered yourself." The fallen king understood then that his defeat was born not of chance but of arrogance. The oracle had been right all along. He had indeed destroyed a great empire, his own. Cyrus's generals urged execution, but the great king hesitated. He saw in Croesus not a threat but a lesson. Yet tradition demanded a king's end by fire. A pyre was built, high and terrible, outside the gates of Sardis. As dawn broke, Croesus was bound upon it. The flames roared to life, and the crowd fell silent. With the heat upon his face, Croesus cried out one name, Solon. The Greeks nearby stirred, remembering the Athenian sage who once warned him, "Call no man happy until his end is known." The fire blazed higher, but then the wind shifted. A sudden gust swept down from the hills, scattering the flames. The Persians gasped, Cyrus saw what seemed divine intervention. He ordered the fire quenched and Croesus released. The old king, half blinded by smoke, whispered a prayer to Apollo, thanking the god who had both punished and spared him. Cyrus helped him to his feet. "Let your story live," he said, "so others may remember what pride destroys." The two men, conqueror and conquered, stood side by side in the ashes of Lydia. For the first time, Croesus felt not cursed, but free from illusion. His crown was gone, but wisdom, at last, was his. Sardis lay silent beneath the morning light, its grandeur reduced to soot and rubble. The Persians began rebuilding, but the city's soul was gone. Cyrus, gazing over the ruins, felt the fleeting nature of victory. Power, he knew, was a tide, rising and receding beyond any man's control. He spared Croesus, keeping him as a counselor, not a captive. "You will teach what pride forgets," Cyrus said. The once great king, stripped of wealth and title, spoke with the calm of one who had already faced the fire. In exile, Croesus found the wisdom that had eluded him in glory. He became a quiet advisor, warning of the dangers of arrogance and haste. When asked about his fall, he would only say, "I believed fortune loved me more than the gods allowed." Meanwhile, the whisper that had begun it all, the betrayal of Eurybatus, echoed through time. The slave vanished into obscurity, yet his act remained immortal. One man's murmur had reshaped empires. Generations later, Herodotus recorded Croesus's tale as a parable. Philosophers repeated his cry to Solon. Poets turned his ruin into verse. Lydia's gold faded, but its lesson endured, that wealth invites blindness, and pride makes kings deaf to truth. The Pactolus River still flowed, but its sands no longer glittered. As centuries passed, every empire that rose on that same soil, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, met the same fate. Pride, conquest, decline, remembrance, the eternal rhythm of power. In the end, it was not gold or glory that made Croesus immortal, but the wisdom born from his ruin. The whisper that toppled his kingdom still speaks across time, reminding all rulers that empires fall not by sword or fire, but by the silence before the warning is heard.